Well, thank you so much for joining me. This might be the biggest workshop I've ever done. It's super exciting to see so many people here, and especially on this wild journey into publishing. I'm super, super excited to be here. I've given similar workshops before, but for this one, I have revamped all of the slides and updated the content. And I'm hoping that it will make it a little bit more approachable and accessible, and also just maybe a little bit clearer. So, we're going to try and speak for, or I'm going to try and speak for about an hour, and we'll leave lots of time for questions at the end as well. So, like I said, this is going to be a workshop about queries and first pages. But of course, like anything that has to do with your query package, I'm hoping that the concepts that we'll address tonight will also apply to your larger body of work and will include content as well that you can sort of expand through your manuscript. So, my hope is that this will be great for people who are just starting out querying, but also so that if you are kind of mid query process or working on something new or feeling discouraged, this might be able to give you a little bit of new insight or maybe a refresh so that you can feel a little bit more energized about this process. So let's jump in. I will first let me just present so that you get the bigger view of these adorable slides. I love doing cute slides. It is as much fun for me as it is for other people. So, um, let me start with what we're going to cover tonight. So, first, I'm going to introduce myself a little bit more thoroughly, and then we'll get right into it. So, the two main things that we're going to cover are the query letter and first page, which are sort of the universal elements of any query package when you are submitting to an agent, and also a lot of the time when you're submitting to an editor or a small publisher. So I'm hoping that this will be useful for all sorts of people working on all different kinds of query packages. And then at the very end, I'll also talk about other elements of query packages and what those sorts of things might look like. And that's where we can kind of get into some of the more specific questions. So, one of the things that I have tried for this workshop that I'm really excited about because I'm a huge nerd is to have the essential elements of a query checklist um, boiled down into really digestible checklists. So I've tried to, the things that I'm going to talk about in sort of like the elements portion, I also have slides with a checklist on them. If you screenshot those checklists, they will hopefully be super, super helpful for you. And of course, if you can watch in replay, you can copy them down, anything like that as well. These tools are for you to use and to share. So, my name is Emmy. I've already introduced myself a little bit, so I won't go on and on. I'm a faculty member at the Manuscript Academy. I'm also an advisor for the Fold and for Sheridan College. And in my agenting work, I typically use a hands on conscious editing approach. So that's sort of the perspective that I come to this workshop with as well. And that just means that I try to be as inclusive and anti oppressive in my work as possible. My pronouns are they and them for when you're asking questions. And I think that's pretty much everything that you need to know about me. But if you want some more information, I do work for Westwood Creative Artists. So there's information about me on our website there. And my personal website is emmy.ooo. So emmy.ooh. And you can find all the details about me and my life there. So let's get right into it since it's 8:40 already. First of all, let's talk about the query letter. So I always feel like a query letter is so intimidating to people. Um, it's something that, a lot of writing programs don't give a lot of instruction on. There's a lot of conflicting information on the internet and in podcasts and things like that. So, what I've really tried to do is boil the query down into its most essential parts. And these will apply to any project that you work on. So, whether that's querying a nonfiction, super serious science book, or you're querying a picture book, a query letter is always going to be more or less the same as long as you're sending it to an agent who works in traditional publishing or a traditional independent publisher. So there are three basic elements of a query letter. And once these are sort of broken down, I'm hoping that it won't be scary anymore. And that even though it might be a difficult thing to wrap your head around and write, I'm hoping that it won't be confusing or unclear as to like what you need to get in there to have a really successful query letter that's going to grab the attention of people who you send it to. So, the first thing in your query letter after Dear Agent Editor Name is a metadata paragraph. And generally speaking, that is like one paragraph, and it just includes all kind of the stats of your book. So, if you're thinking of your book as like a Pokemon or a like an athlete, for example, all of the statistical information, everything that's kind of dry and factual about your book, that's all going to go into the metadata paragraph. So it should really be one paragraph. It should include everything that we actually need to know about your book. Part of the reason why we do this and why we put it up right at the top is because a lot of agents don't actually get their queries directly to their own email inboxes or to like a central database where they can sort of access it and um, evaluate it on their own time. We get so many queries. And so a lot of the times these queries are going through some sort of system. So for example, at Westwood, we have a central inbox where all of our submissions come in for all of our agents. And we have one of our agents in training or one of our staff go through all of them, make sure they get to the right people, make sure that they have all the materials in the query letter that we need, all of those kinds of things. So having that information right up top makes our jobs so much easier. And you always want to make the jobs of people as easy as possible, because that means that your query will get to who you want to see it as quickly as it possibly can. So I usually get about, I would say, gosh, maybe 30 to 40 queries a week on average. And so if there are 15 of those that are really difficult to parse through and understand, those are the ones that I'm likely going to read last, because it just takes so much time to get through that stack of emails every single week. So if you can make your metadata paragraph clear, crisp, clean, then that will ensure that you get to the top of that pile. And I'll talk about in the next slide what actually needs to go in there in detail. The second thing that needs to go in a query letter, and it's usually only 2 to 3 paragraphs, is a summary. It's different than a synopsis. So a synopsis, you want to have all of your spoilers in there. Your summary in your query letter should not be like that. You do not need to stress out about including every single detail of your writing project in your query letter. A lot of people find it really, really difficult to boil, a 60 to 80,000 word book down to 2 paragraphs. It is normal that is a difficult process, and you shouldn't expect yourself to be able to put every single element of your book into those couple of pages. And the way that I suggest getting over that anxiety and to get to where choosing what details you're putting into those paragraphs feels intuitive is to think about your summary paragraphs as a teaser of your writing sample. The goal of a query letter is always to get through all of that material and have the person who's reading be super excited to read your writing sample, because that's really what's going to sell your book to an agent or to an editor, is your writing ultimately. So we want this part to be simple and easy and clear and to do its job so that we can get through it and get to that sample at the end. And again, I'll talk more about the summary on the next slide. Last but not least, before you sign off, you want to include a bio. And this part sounds really simple, but I get so many letters that don't have a bio in them at all. Zero bio, no information about the author. And that's really, really tricky, because as much as I love reading about people's books, and as much as that's ultimately the thing that, we're going to be working on together, the relationship between an agent and an author, or an editor and an author, is ultimately a creative business agreement. And I want to know who I'm going to be working with and how I can best work with those people. So without a bio, that's really, really difficult to know. So in your bio, you definitely want to think about it as a publishing bio first. So this is your place to include all of your brags, everything that you want someone to know that you've been working so hard on, that you've achieved in your writing career so far. You want to include all of those accolades. You want to include all of those bylines and anything that you've been doing that would count as like writing education. So, for example, if you attended a live query workshop with me, that might be something that you might include if you're a debut author and this is like one of your first steps in your publishing career. So, you're in the right place. And when you're thinking about your bio, you want to make sure that you tell people all of the hard work that you've done. Okay. So, three elements of a query letter: metadata paragraph, summary, bio. Nice, polite sign off. Make sure that you get people's names as right as you can in your address to them, and you should be good to go. So this is the query checklist. I really enjoyed putting this together. I really, really hope that this will be super, super helpful to you. And the reason why I think a checklist is a great tool for when you're query writing is because we do so many drafts of these things, right? You can really lose sight as you're going through. I know when I've written my own cover letters or query letters, by the end of the third or fourth draft, sometimes I don't even remember what was in the first draft. So this checklist is intended to be a tool that you can kind of keep like off to the side in a folder somewhere, taped to your desk, stuck up on your bulletin board as you're drafting. And when you get to the end of a draft and you're like, okay, this is perfect, you can go back to the query checklist and you can be like, did I include all of these things? Check, 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 check. So no matter how kind of creative or, you know, I hesitate to use the word experimental because queries are not really the place for experimenting, but creative is maybe the best way to phrase it. No matter how creative you get with your letter, you can go back and make sure that every element that needs to be in there is in there. So let's start at the top. First of all, ideally, query letter 500 words or less. I say 500 words in like a very general way because, you know, when I'm thinking about query letters, I'm thinking about them very broadly. So any project that needs a query letter. But your summary paragraphs are obviously not going to be as long if you're working on, you know, a 600 word picture book as they would be if you're working on like a 4 volume epic fantasy. So I would just keep in mind when you're writing your letter that the length should be proportional to the size of the project. I don't need to read necessarily 500 words if your whole book is 600 words. I might need to read like 300 words or 200 words. If you're writing like, especially if you're pitching like a multi volume project or a complex nonfiction project, something that might later be accompanied by a book proposal, then yeah, your query is likely going to be on the longer side. And I would say that that's also true of things that have a lot of heavy pardon me, world building. That said, 500 words is more than enough to get all of this information in. And the reason I say that is because we as agents and editors want to see your writing skills come through in the query too. So we want to know that you can edit yourself and that you can go through and revise and that you can be really concise and efficient. So even if your book is, you know, close on 100,000 words, try and keep your query letter under 500 words and try not to think of it as your only chance either. Ideally, anything that doesn't get covered in the query, you're then going to have time to follow up with in the call or after, you know, the editor or agent who you're writing to has had a chance to read more of your work. This is like a first step, a first tool. So let's go through this checklist. You'll see here that I've organized it by the same 3 sections as my previous slide. So metadata paragraph, summary, publishing bio. Those are your 3 essential elements. Your metadata paragraph, you want to start with a personalization. So that is telling the agent or the editor who you are addressing your query to why you chose them. So did you hear of me because you did a workshop with me? Did you hear of me on a podcast? Did you know that I represented one of your favorite books that you've ever read? Did you find me in a Google search and something about, you know, my Twitter account resonated with you? What is it that makes you pick me or the person you're addressing your query letter to from all the hundreds of editors and agent options out there in the world? What makes you think that you would be the right fit for me or that I would be the right fit for you? How did you find me? Tell me something. That should just be like one sentence. It's not a huge deal, but it can really, really help to kind of give the person you're writing the letter to a little bit of insight and to make it feel a little bit more unique based on, you know, the mass quantity of queries that we sometimes receive. And if you're writing and querying, say, like a publisher or an agency, that can be just as useful. So focus on, you know, what about that agency drew you in? Have you read books from that publisher before? Any of those kinds of things. The second thing, straightforward, but also surprisingly happens that people do not include the title of their book in the first paragraph. I always encourage people, the industry standard is to capitalize book titles, all book titles. Please capitalize your own. It will make it, you know, feel and seem as professional and polished as it absolutely should at this stage in the game. I don't think it's necessary ever to kind of like bold, underline, special format to make your title stand out. We're all looking for the title. Just make sure it gets in there and that it's one that you are happy with, but ideally not too attached to, because sometimes we go through a lot of those in the editing process. So personalization, title. The third thing, a little more complicated, and I won't get too deep into this because we can talk about it in Q&A if it's something that people are interested in, but genre is the next one. I would say that when you are picking a genre, try to be as specific and simple as possible. So if you don't picture the words that you are using as your genre on a shelf at Barnes and Noble, that is probably not as useful as if you do. So if I walk into a Barnes and Noble and I see, historical fiction, Western, those types of things, those are the kinds of words that marketing and publicity are going to look for in your query letter to know how they would publicize your book and how they would sell it to a reader, what your potential audience is. So try to keep it simple, try and keep it specific, especially if you're in the science fiction and fantasy space. Tell me a little bit more maybe than just science fiction or just fantasy, because we all know that there are like niche communities for all different types of very specific works in those areas. I'm also noticing that there are already more than 10 questions in the Q&A. So please, if you do have questions about genre, pop them in there and I will do my best to get to them. The next two are pretty straightforward as well. Word count. You want to have, if your book is a fiction project, you need to have a full manuscript written of your book before you send it out to query. So please include your final word count for the book. And you want to include ideally 2 to 3 comps. Again, comps is something I could probably talk about for an entire hour, but for the sake of simplicity, comps are titles that you would compare with your book in terms of like a quality of the book. And the most effective comps, in my opinion, are ones where you can tell me exactly why you've picked them. So, for example, if your book is a fantasy book about unicorns and you tell me, one of my comps is X title because it also has unicorns, that is a great comp, especially if the book has been published in the last, I would say 3 to 5 years is about as old as I would go. I also avoid huge blockbuster bestsellers. And part of the reason for that is because you are setting yourself up to be compared with these authors. So please give yourself an easier task than that. But yeah, so if you tell me, this book has the same subject matter, like in the example I just shared, that's a really great, straightforward one. But you can choose comps for all kinds of different reasons. Ideally, your book doesn't have an exact comp on the market already. So if you have a character who's similar to a book that you love, or I'm sorry, I just bonked my camera. If the tone of your book is very similar to another book, if the authorial voice or the sense of humor, any of those things, they can all be used as comp titles. So make sure that you tell us, the title of the book, the author's name, and why you think it's a good comp for your book. Again, you don't need a million of these, 2 to 3 absolutely suffice. And they don't need to be super hyper similar. So if you pick, books from different genres, that's okay. Books from different age categories, that's okay, as long as you tell us why they are similar to your book. All of those little facts, metadata paragraph, it's the Pokemon card for your book. They all go in the first part of your query letter. The next 2 to 3 paragraphs are your summary, which is very, very straightforward compared to the metadata paragraph. There's a lot less that technically has to go in there, but it's probably the most difficult part to write. The summary paragraphs ideally will mirror the writing style of your submission. So if you are writing say a rom-com novel, your summary paragraph should be written in a similar tone and voice to the style of your manuscript itself. So I would say that most rom-com novels that I get in my inbox are like voicey, they feel very fresh, they're pretty quick, there's accessible language, there might be a little bit of humor in there. Obviously, I'm hearing about a romantic plot line, those sorts of things. If I'm reading, though, a memoir that's about an immigrant who, is recently arrived in the country and had a challenging time coming to the country, then obviously the tone of that summary paragraph should not be, voicey, funny, romantic. It should be a little more serious, a little bit more professional. And a little bit more poetic, likely, depending on what you are working on. So that's not to say that a memoir of that style can't be written in a voicey, funny tone. If that's the tone of your book, then definitely your summary should also be that way, and that should go for all works. So I hope that that makes sense. You don't need to write it from the point of view of your character or anything like that, but I want to get an idea or like a taste of what the flavor of your writing style is going to be in your writing paragraph, in your writing sample. I'm sorry, in your summary paragraphs. The two main things that you need to include in that summary are an introduction to your main characters and the conflict and stakes of the novel. Those are the things, novel or book, my apologies. Those are the things that are going to draw in readers, and those are the most important elements that you need to get in there. Obviously, if you have a really fresh hook, that should also go in the summary, but I understand that not all books are based on, like a really punchy hook. If you do have one, great. If you don't, then focus on the main characters and the conflict and the stakes. Those are going to be the things that really capture hearts. Again, 2 to 3 paragraphs should be enough. You don't need to tell us all the spoilers, save that for your synopsis, and really try and think of it as when somebody reads this summary, it's almost like reading the jacket copy, like the back of a book in a bookstore. You want them to read it and then be like, I want to read more of this. That's your goal. And so if you get them to, I always tell people, like, my most successful query letters are the ones where, like, I get halfway through the summary and I'm like, I cannot wait. I need to read this book right now. And I skip to the end and read the writing sample right away. That is like the perfect place to be in. Last but not least, publishing bio. And here I've tried to give a little bit more detail on this slide about what kinds of things we want to see in the publishing bio. So if you have prior publications, bylines, accolades, and by accolades, I mean like any awards or recognition that you've gotten for your writing. This doesn't have to be for your fiction writing or for your memoir writing or for any kind of writing that you've done in the book that you're querying. It could be, if you write for your day job, if you've written as a journalist before, if you're a blogger. Try not to swamp people with detail, but if you have things that you're really, really proud of, they should definitely go in there. Any training or mentorship that you've received over the years. So if you've worked with a book coach, if you've worked with a professional editor, if you've had, a friend who's a successful author who you've worked with, if you've taken, post-secondary education in writing and worked with anyone who you think has really influenced you, all of those are great. Think of them kind of as work references, but a little more casual. Nobody's going to call them up and ask for your details. That said, publishing is also kind of a small world, so be prepared for people to know who you're speaking about and to maybe have a casual check-in with them if they do know them personally. Um, Relevant professional credentials, and I say this because a lot of writers have elements of their professional or working lives or even their personal lives that apply to their book. So if you do copywriting, say, as your day job, if you are an electrical engineer and the main character of your book is an electrical engineer, I would also call that relevant. So think creatively about the ways that your professional, working, personal lives have influenced your writing and your publishing journey. And that's what I mean by professional here, because when we're talking about querying, at this point you are a professional author. So that's where the professional part comes in. Any credentials that you have that are related to that professional life, throw them in there. I love to hear personally about people's motivation for pursuing writing and publication. What made you want to write this book? What made you want to tell this story? And why, after you've written it, are you going through this extremely difficult process of trying to find a publisher for it and getting it a wider audience? That's always something that I have in the back of my mind. And if it's not something that's in the query checklist, in the query letter, it's going to be something that I'm going to ask in the first 5 seconds of the phone call with you. So it's always good to have an answer for that in mind. And then I also, if you have space within those 500 words, I love to hear a little bit about people as people. So it's great for me if, when I am going into um, an agent in call or when someone queries me, if I know a little bit about you and your personality and I feel like we might gel as people, that's a great starting point. So if you can kind of include like a couple of little facts about yourself that you feel comfortable sharing with like a total stranger, then that is also a really great thing to include in there if you can. So that's the query checklist. That's the query letter. Let's move on to the first page. You'll see that The first page is actually very similar to the query letter in terms of what needs to be in there. And the reason why I talk about specifically the first page and not the first pages is because no matter what length the writing sample is, the first page is always going to be what makes the first impression. Also, ultimately, when you're thinking down the line, it will be the first thing that editors read when they're considering it for acquisition, and it will be the first thing that a reader reads. So the first impression, super, super important. Remember when you are writing your first page and when you're sharing it with an editor, and you'll see that I have this little note on the right hand side here. Bring your strongest effort to your first page because the reader is not on your side yet. There are loads of books out there. I bet anything that once a reader gets halfway through a book, they're usually on the side of the author. They want to know what happens, they care about your characters. When they are standing in the grocery store lineup and they are flipping through a book that is on sale on the shelf, like one of those little newsstand type areas, and their kid is asking if they can have a snack, and they know they have to get home because the laundry is sitting wet in the washer, and there's traffic in between there and then, and like what are they going to have for dinner, all of these things, they're not on your side yet. You need to like really, really hook them on that first page. Whatever your book is, they're already interested, and you need to convince them that staying with you is the right choice. So, just like the query letter, there are three things that need to happen on the first page of any book. First, you need to meet the main character. And I don't mean just like their name, their birthday, that kind of thing. Those things can all come out later. Those are all important elements, but I really want to get like a sense of who they are as a person. So look at your character development skills that you use throughout your novel and crank those to max for the first page. Tell me how they smell. Tell me who their friends are. Tell me what their relationship with their family is like. Tell them if their cat is going to invade their Zoom call later tonight. Tell me whatever you want to tell me about them, but make sure that you tell me details about them. So I want to really, really meet them. So that's the first thing, main character essential. The second thing is the central organizing feature of the book. And I purposely didn't call this the conflict, even though in many novels, a conflict is the central organizing feature of the book. But I have a lot of people who come to me and say, like, oh, my book has four different points of view and three different plot lines, and there is no central conflict in the book because there are all these different things that overlap and intertwined. It's super nuanced, it's super layered, it's super literary. It doesn't have like one central problem. Okay, but a book needs something for people to wrap their head around. A book needs a central organizing feature. So whether you want to think of that as the conflict, whether you want to think of that as a theme, whether you want to think of that as a message, whatever that core element of that book is, that needs to be clear from the very first page. That's super, super important. And like, I can't impress that upon people enough. I often tell, um, authors this story because it had a really big impression on me as someone, especially someone who likes to read kind of slice of life, quiet books. But I had a conversation with an editor a couple of years back. I was on a phone call with them. They were a young adult editor, but I do think this applies to any honestly any book that's destined for traditional publishing these days. And she told me that if nothing has exploded by page 2, then she's out. So, in terms of people's expectations of pacing in traditional publishing these days, they are really, really needing things right up front, really, really fast. Um, and for me, that means first page because sometimes that's as far as people will go if you don't really, really hook them. So, the first page of your novel or your book should include the main character, central organizing feature. So think of that as the conflict, the theme, the message of the book. Whatever you are writing about at the core, that needs to come through. The third thing is related to the first two things. And there are lots of different ways to phrase this, and I've never really come up with one that I guess kind of like fits the best for me, but I'm working on it. And this is the closest I've come so far, which is what helps and what hurts. So in any novel, book, story, whatever, whoever your main character is, they're going to have certain skills and life circumstances that are going to help them get to the end of the book, and they're going to have certain things that are going to hurt them in getting to the end of the book. So, when you're thinking about character development, and this is maybe moving a little bit beyond how you can apply these principles to the first page and moving to kind of like how do we apply these principles overall to our novel, but there you need to think of your characters always like whatever system it is you use to develop them in terms of like three different things. So, past, present, and future is how I think of it. There's something in their past that has made them who they are. That those things always come into play. They're wrestling with something in the present, otherwise this is going to be like a real boring book. And they're worried about the future because whatever happens in this book is going to determine that. So some of those things are going to be conscious, unconscious. We could talk about character development for a long time. But what we need to see on that first page is what things from their past, present, and future. So like sort of their in classical writing terms, I guess we'd talk about kind of their traumas, their present, the central conflict, and also like what the stakes of the book are. What is going to help them get through this conflict and out the other side, and what is going to make it harder for them? We don't know where the conflict will resolve. We don't know where the themes of the book will emerge. We don't know, what the overall message will be, but there will be factors in there that will impact the characters, and we need to get those teased right on that very first page. That's absolutely essential so that people know what this book is, what they're getting into. So those are those first three elements. But sorry, those are the three elements, not the first three elements. That's it. And I have made a checklist for the first page as well. So I'm going to go through the first page checklist, and then we will have some time for questions. So I'll try and make this part quick because I am sure there are plenty of questions. So just to be clear, this is the very first page of your book. It's 250 words. Do not shortchange yourself on the formatting. If you are writing in Chicago style, which is sort of the industry standard for traditional publishing, typically, there will be more than enough space for 250 words in Times New Roman, 12 point, double spaced on that first page. It is short and there is a lot to cram in there. So do not waste your time with exposition. This is sort of an old way of doing things. Start in the action of the book. And I think that later we're going to talk about a longer workshop that I am offering later this month at the Manuscript Academy. It is something that I am super passionate about, that we do not deal with exposition in the first pages of a book anymore. There is sort of an upside down approach to writing these days. But the reader expectation is that you will start in the plot action of the book. So unlike query letters, there is no kind of structured, like this needs to come first, then this for the first page of your book. These three elements can all kind of feed each other, but all of these things on this checklist need to be in there. And once you have written 9,000 drafts of your first little page, you should be able to take this checklist, just like the query letter one, and go back and be like, okay, have I included this? Have I included this? Have I included this? And if you can check off all of these things, they're all there in some way, shape, or form, then you will know that your first page is complete and agent ready or editor ready. So I'm going to go in order just like I did in the first slide, just for the sake of my own organizational brain. But of course, you're going to jump around from these things, from one thing to another when you're actually doing the writing, because no first page is exactly the same. Your main character. All books have one. Even books with multiple points of view should have a main character. They should have a character that you think of, not necessarily as a protagonist. Books can have multiple protagonists for sure, but they should be kind of the heart character of the book. So you want people years from now to remember that character's name. You want them to remember them like they're an old friend. If they go back to read the book, they should feel like, to read it again years later, they should feel familiar to them. It is important to have one book that the one character that the book is sort of focused on, and that is the one that you want to introduce on that very first page. In many cases, and this is very much simplifying the issue, but for a lot of books, that will be your POV character. If you have dual POV, there is usually a character from whose point of view you have written this book, and then another character who they are going to encounter and fall in love with. If you have written a multi-POV book, even with, 4, 5, 6 characters, there's probably one who is most central to the story, who knows everybody in the book, who is most involved in the story. That is your main character, and that is the one that you want to kind of capture your reader, you want them to come through on the very first page. They don't even necessarily have to actually be present in the scene to be the one who is the focus. The second thing that we want to know about them on that first page is, where are they going? Like, in life, in this story, in this journey. Like, not literally, I'm driving to, IHOP, but like, where are they going metaphorically? What is their goal in this book? And why do I, as the reader, care about that? So if they are going to IHOP, cool. Like, maybe it's the zombie apocalypse and the IHOP is their, safe haven. And if they get there, pancakes are, the cure. Um, if they are going to IHOP, though, I need to know that it is the zombie apocalypse and that, they need to get to those pancakes, because otherwise it's not really that big a deal that they're going to the IHOP. You know what I mean? So why do I, as a reader, care? Where are they going? Who is your central character? And also, what is the voice of that character? So this is a little bit different from authorial voice, in the sense that we want to know, like, their narrative voice. Like, who are they? How do they talk? What are some of their mannerisms? That's one of the main ways that you can introduce a main character to a reader. So we want to get little touches of those details. We don't need their whole life story, but what is their voice? How are we going to remember them in our minds? How do they live in our minds? Central organizing feature, like I said, that's your central conflict, question, or theme of the book. It can also be a message. It can be, you know, it can be a range of things, but whatever the thing is that motivated you to write this book, whatever you hope that people will take away from this book, what is the core of this book? And that core will often establish the stakes. Nodding at the stakes is essential, because that's what's going to get people to care that we get to the end of this book. So again, when we're talking about the main character, why do I care about them? But also, when we get to the central organizing feature, like, why do I care about that? What is at stake if I do or if I don't? And last but not least, what helps and what hurts are the barriers and facilitators. So again, that's kind of how the main character and the central organizing feature, I guess, relate to each other. So all of these things about the main character, all of these things about the central organizing feature, what's going to make those things either come together like puzzle pieces or break apart and explode? And all of that should fit in 250 words, and it should be ideally achieved through a scene that has some action in it. There should be something happening on your first page. So I can go on and on about the other elements of a query package. So we can talk a little bit about synopses, which are a little bit different than summaries. We can talk about other things too, like the writing sample itself, although that first page, all of those principles can really carry into your 10 or 20 page sample, or your three chapters, whatever you have. Your bio, obviously, can sometimes be also a separate element. Some agents like to have, a more in-depth bio. Some editors too will like to have like a more fleshed out biography, and a little bit of history about you as an author. There are all kinds of other query package elements, but I think all of these components of the query letter and of the first page really contribute to strengthening all of those as well. And so maybe for the last 15 minutes, what we can do is go to questions, and I can kind of go from there, whether it is to go more in depth into the elements I've already spoken about, or whether we want to talk about other elements of the query package as well.
I mean, I'm excited. One, I want to say, like, I'm so impressed by all the questions and how everyone handled those. Like, it's so great to see you guys just talking and helping each other as we,
Yeah,
this is
I
all really
started
hard.
off Yeah, I
Um,
started off trying to keep up with the chat, and you
yeah,
quickly
it
all
goes
lost
so
me.
fast.
So I really apologize.
Okay,
Please put
so
your
there's
questions in the Q&A, because there are obviously some great ones in
right,
there.
and there's
Yes.
so many good questions. I know we were trying to answer them as we went along, um, but let's just get started. I'm excited.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And remember, you can upvote your favorite questions. I'm just going to choose one first. Emmy, please talk about
Yeah.
the synopsis.
Yeah, for sure. So a lot of agents want a synopsis along with that would be in addition to the query letter and the first page. They're not the same thing. The synopsis, generally speaking, when I ask my authors for a synopsis, I never want them to go over 3 pages. In an ideal world, synopses in my mind would never go over 1 page, but they're really, really difficult to get into that length. And so there are some things that are very different from a synopsis, sorry, and from the summary. So summary, you're more focused on, like I said, it's supposed to be like a teaser for the reader to want to read more of your book. So you want to get that, the writerly tone, you want to get an introduction to the main character, you want to get a little bit, information about the hook if you have one, but also about that central conflict. The synopsis needs to include, it's almost more like a bulleted list of everything that happens in your book. So every single plot point that occurs in your book, whether it's like, somebody punching somebody else, someone meeting somebody else, anything like that needs to be included in the synopsis, including like everything. So if you think like spoilers, all the spoilers go in there, including the end. And I can't really emphasize that enough, because I am the type of person, I do not handle surprise well. I do not like being surprised in life in general, but especially not in books. And even when I am reading recreationally, that's true, but it goes like triply when I'm considering something as a query. So definitely include the ending of the book in the synopsis. That is generally why people ask for it. So in those 1 to 3 pages, you don't need to worry about like writing style, tone, any of those things. It's really, really factual. It will be so difficult if you try to be writerly about this document. It's really more of a tool than anything like creative. So I always suggest to people, like, go through your book, write down every, character, plot point, and then just edit, edit, edit until it's in paragraphs. And it's really like, it tends to read kind of awkwardly, but the whole point is just to be informative. So yeah, as short as you can get it, as clear as you can get it, and as all encompassing as you can get it within the length that you're being asked for is ideal. And I actually think it's a pretty good exercise, especially for people who aren't outliners. People who are outliners have like a really easy time with synopses a lot of the time, because they can just go back to their outline and be like, oh, these are all the things I wrote in there. Great, check. But if you are more of a pantser when you're writing, then it can be really useful exercise to go back and be like, no, really, what did I put in there?
Right.
um,
Yeah. I
and
mean,
Yeah.
like a
be like
quick
a
tip.
good review document. Yeah.
Right. Like a quick tip, just from like a screenwriting perspective,
Mhm.
is like, try to, inciting incident, right to the turning points,
Yes.
try to get the 3 acts, but don't put everything, just try to get like the
Yeah,
main, as if you were sitting around talking about, well, and this happened, and then this happened,
Yeah.
totally.
and that's a good way to kind of pull back. So that is the
Yeah.
perfect way to talk about, because what you said was, I don't want to be surprised. So let's
No.
start with this question. Oh my gosh, people were upvoting as we did that. But I'm just going to go for that one that was there a few minutes ago. Tell me about trigger warnings. Do you want them? Why is it important?
Hmm.
Like, and why should you include it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that every agent and every editor would have probably a different answer to this question. There is no like right or wrong answer. I personally think that you can't go wrong with including trigger warnings or content warnings, because people, obviously, when I say I don't want to be surprised, like that's just like a personal preference. Like, I'm partially joking, partially, but like people who don't want to be surprised in a really negative way and have their whole day derailed because they read something that's going to be really, really challenging for them. That's like a whole other level. So for me, I usually tell people to include trigger warnings with their writing sample and not to waste the space in the query letter. Also, because the way that I organize my stuff, like I may not read the query letter and the writing sample always together. So it's really helpful for me if people just add like a quick note. It can just be a list, like at the top of your writing sample. I usually just put like a CW in italics and then like a little bulleted list of things. If you're only offering like a short sample, you only need to offer trigger warnings or content warnings for what's in that sample. But if you get a full request at that point in like the email or the letter accompanying the manuscript, and potentially also at the top of the manuscript, I would just include content warnings for the whole book so that nobody runs into something, halfway through in the middle of the night when they're like laying in bed reading that is like really troubling for them. So, yeah, I think you can't really go too hard on content warnings, and it can be useful, especially as you're writing, to just like keep a note on the side of like things that other people might find distressing, even if you don't,
Mm.
so that you can use that at the end.
Yeah, and
You
I
can
would
also put
say
it before that chapter too.
yeah, and I
Oh,
would say that,
100%.
like,
Yeah.
while Twitter is vile, and we all know it's vile right now, a lot of agents are putting their trigger warnings there, so you can kind of, like, see before, and that might help with the querying process.
Totally. And some people will have them in their manuscript wish lists and things like that as
Mhm.
well if they have one. I know that like for me, it's not like a really a content warning, I guess, but like things with zombies totally wig me out for whatever reason. I have that in my
So weird.
manuscript wish
No,
list.
we
I
all
know
have
I
weird
love
stuff
horror,
though.
but yeah, there's like weird things that get in your head, right? So like, sometimes people do send me queries with them and sometimes it's fine, but I do like to know.
Wait,
It's really
Jessica, do you
helpful.
not like unicorns?
I don't like angels. I think they're creepy. And I'm very sorry. I know a lot of people have strong positive feelings about angels, but we all like different things.
Oh my
Their
gosh.
wings just look
Very
sharp.
real.
All right,
Okay.
I'm gonna
What
push this
if
along.
we
I'm gonna push this along
Okay,
because,
what
like
if we don't have any writing accolades? What should we put in our bio?
right.
Oh, totally fine. I mean, those are the things that I don't want the things on the checklist are things that I don't want people to forget if they do have them. That said, like there's no requirement that you have these things. They're just things that if you already have achieved a thing, make sure you tell me. But that said, like anything that's relevant to your writing, so I've seen beautiful bios that are just about why people wrote the book that they're sending to me, or, like what inspired the book, what their home life is like, and like what they think might make them a great client for me. And I think that any of those things are totally fine. I would just say that, like, if you think to yourself, like, is this relevant to my writing? And the answer is yes, like, you could absolutely put it in your bio. So just be picky about, what things you think represent you as a person and you as an author.
I love the personal experience bio too. Like you're writing about a psychologist
Yeah.
and you're also a psychologist. That's awesome.
Yeah.
We love it.
I always get really excited about that because you get different kinds of books from different kinds of people, obviously, but there is something special about a book that didn't need like outside research, that like you're writing from your own like visceral experiences. And so I always love to know those like weird things like, yeah, my mom was a ant scientist and so I know a weird amount about ants. Like that's cool for you. Like that's awesome. And I want to know more about ants. So tell me more about
Oh
ants.
my gosh.
Now I
Yeah.
want to know more about ants.
Yeah, and it
Um,
might yeah, right, and some of that stuff might just be like, I am passionate about my writing group, I am at the Manuscript
100%.
Academy, I am, da, 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 like, don't
Yeah,
obsess. It's all okay. All right, I'm
totally.
moving us along,
okay.
I'm doing it. If you have a prologue, should that be first page or should we send chapter 1?
So, so I get asked this question all the time, and I just want to be totally clear that like my personal opinion about this is not the be all and end all. So if you feel strongly about your prologue, you use it as your first page. You go. I support you in your endeavors. For me personally, I find prologues can be polarizing. And as a reader, and maybe this is like one of those sacrilegious things that I'm about to say in public, but I don't read them. I just skip them. I literally always just skip them. I don't know what to tell you. Maybe that's like my thought crime against the book community, but I just skip them. I always, ever since I was a kid, I've been like, I was like a snobby 5-year-old who was like, if this needs to be in the book, why isn't it in the book? So for me, I always prefer, I mean, obviously, if somebody sends me one as a writing sample, I read it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not like out here messing with your writing lives. But personally, as a reader, I prefer the first chapter. And so I know, though, that there are people who are diehard prologue fans as well. And sometimes that can also be tricky because you're going to evaluate a prologue a little bit differently than you would a first chapter. So, my advice to people is always to use your actual first page, whatever you see that to be, as the first page of your writing sample. Um, and equally, I struggle a little bit too because a lot of people will also ask like, do you have to use your first chapter as your writing sample? And you don't. There's no rules. We're in the Wild West out here, like you can use whatever your heart desires as your writing sample. But I will say that like most commonly people will want to see your first page at some point. So for me, like if we're playing on the safe side and trying to appeal to like the largest number of people in like a neutral, like no barriers kind of way, I would say use the first page of your first chapter as your first page of your writing sample and go from there in general. If there's like some deep seated, like deep rooted heart, feeling you have about your prologue or your like chapter 7, go for it. Nobody's going to like boot your query out of their inbox because of that, but it's I think that eventually somebody's going to be evaluating your first page and is useful to think of that from the very beginning stages.
I mean, if I was gonna jump in here after being a writer and looking at a lot of like queries and then first pages, is jarring if your query is about like Joe and then you have a prologue about Charlie. I'm like, who's Charlie? You know what I mean? So think about
It's true.
what your query says, and then think about what your first page says. And I think that you're creating something in that query that's piquing interest. And then if we're
Mhm.
going somewhere totally else, it's
Yeah.
might burn you. So think about that.
Yeah. And you can also make that a little bit smoother by like telling us in your query letter if you have done something unusual. Like if you have 6 POVs, this is not something I highly recommend, but if you do, like mentioning that in your query will make it make more sense
Oh.
when like I read one POV and then I request your full manuscript and I'm like, where did that character go?
Where's
Yeah.
Charlie?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I liked her. Bring her back.
So we have some prologue content on our YouTube. I've put the link below. And yeah, that's just a place where you can see agents talking on various subjects. There's a question here that we're going to answer with a video in terms of how to search on manuscriptwishlist.com if you're writing in multiple genres. But for the rest of it, for writers who want a multifaceted career with different genres, how do you recommend they query an agent? For example, let's say the book they're querying is nonfiction, but they're also working on romance. It feels like agents don't want to hear about all the other potential projects, but I'd want to know that that agent is committed to a long-term career plan that may include different genres.
Yeah, so the biggest thing to think about is that all agents are wildly different. We are all human beings, but in addition to that, like it is a relatively unregulated industry, and we all get to make our own choices, which is both great and terrible. So, I would say that you are looking for a particular type of agent. So, for example, I represent my clients right like across age categories and genres. So for me, I always love to hear what else other people are working on because my worst nightmare, maybe not my worst, but like a bad one, is that I would fall in love with a book, sign the author, and then later they would say to me, "Oh, by the way, all my other projects are picture books," when I just signed like their, super sciency fantasy novel. And I'm like, "Oh, okay." Like we are in different places. So I in your bio is a great place to mention your goals in the writing industry. If you write a bunch of different kinds of books, that is a great place to state that, to kind of say like, I this is my first book or this is my first novel, or even if it's not, like whatever your approach is. Tell me that, and also say, and also I'm working on a romantic comedy. Like for me, that's great because I represent people all over the place. And maybe when I'm reading my queries, I'm looking for an author in that space as well. So it's really, really helpful to have that information up front. But really, it goes back to your research because there are agencies that are more focused on um, single project contracts, which I think are becoming rarer and rarer. And then there are agencies that focus on career contracts. And you can usually tell from the submission guidelines and from the clients that they work with and the books that they've published kind of what their approach is. So, for example, at Westwood, where I work, and this actually goes for all the agencies in Canada to my knowledge, we work with clients like on a career basis only. So it would be like a very rare exception for me to sign somebody, and it has happened, but like it is extremely rare to sign somebody knowing that we're only going to do one book together. Generally speaking, the assumption is like, we're going to do this book together and then hopefully 12 more. And we're going to have long, healthy publishing lives together. That's the goal. So I would say, that is a great question to ask an agency, to ask an agent. You can always send inquiries like that if it's not clear from the website. But definitely, if you work in multiple genres, you want to make sure that you're querying editors who are open to all of those genres and work in those areas.
Also, don't pitch your next 12 books, maybe.
No, no.
Just say you are working in a specific genre, or if there's just one other
Yeah.
book, you could say, and I am writing this other book, and it is The Bridges of Madison County meets Jaws.
Yeah, totally. I also love when people say, like, my goal is to publish across multiple genres, or like, my goal is to publish both picture books and narrative nonfiction. Like, that's awesome. That's all I really need to know, like, okay, I work in both those areas. We're still compatible. But if somebody wants to write, like a lot of people want to write, 75 romance novels, like awesome, then say that. My goal is to publish a romance novel every year until I die. Those are very different approaches to publishing, but if your agent is open to it, like they'll really appreciate knowing that you're on the same page.
And I would say anything you're that passionate about, bring it up in the offer call. That's when everything
Definitely.
comes out. When you tell them about past projects, when you tell them about past agents,
Totally.
anything that could possibly affect your career with them, that's when you tell
Yeah.
them. And while we're on genre, if you have a book
Yeah.
that stretches across multiple genres, do you have any advice on how best to express, showcase, or explain that?
So multiple genres in one book now.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So, generally speaking, like, I like to call that, and I feel like the industry buzzword for that in the last couple of years has been genre bending. We love that term. I don't know why. It doesn't really make a lot of sense, but here we are. But I would say that that's something you want to mention like in your metadata paragraph. So if you think that your book is, a romantic science fiction or um my brain is blanking on multiple genres that could possibly go together. Like a Western cookbook is not really a combination that I've seen before, but like, hypothetically, um, that would be information that I would put in your metadata paragraph. And it should also come through in your comps potentially. So, like I said, each comp doesn't have to represent your entire book. It can be a great place to kind of be like, if your book is like a thriller, but also has like strong, I don't know, like enemies to lovers vibes, like maybe you want to pick one book from each of those categories to kind of represent what your book would be. um but ultimately, the thing that you want to think about when you're thinking about genre in your query is that with the ways that books get acquired further down the line, whether it's by a small publisher or a big publisher, is that normally there are marketing and publicity people who are going to have a say in whether or not an editor gets to work on this book with you, especially if you're looking at traditional publishing with like a big multinational publisher, but it's true at all levels. And those people are going to have to know how to sell that book. And if you don't give them a genre to work with, that makes their job way harder. So it's not to say that they won't do it or that they'll never do it. If your book like absolutely blows somebody away, it might not matter at all. And especially if you have a back catalog and proven sales record, it matters a lot less. But as a debut author, you do kind of want to make their jobs as easy as possible. So if you can find a way to phrase your genre that's very specific and that they can think, okay, like this is where I would want to sell this, whether it's like in independent bookstores or whether it's, on a CVS shelf or in a newsstand or an airport bookstore, and they can picture where it would go in the store, then automatically they're going to have kind of like a plan in their mind of like, these are the people we could market it to. These are the types of campaigns we could do to sell this book. So that's more what the genre is about, really, than like shoehorning your book into a specific space. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, you can also do the thing where you're like, it is book club with a fantasy element, like majoring and minoring in
100%.
college.
Yes, absolutely. And you can also, I mean, like most things that I would classify as like genre bending, I would just call fiction. Like you can just call it
Yeah,
fiction. That's okay too.
yeah. If you're not sure, you can go for the umbrella genre above the specific
Yeah,
one.
absolutely.
Okay, do agents still want to know if an author is own voices in the first paragraph of the query?
I think that depends very much on the agent or the editor. I personally love to know, although there has been some backlash about the actual term own voices. So I would just say that you're writing from lived experience or like, you have firsthand experience, but your bio paragraph is also like a great place to pop that. So, if you're writing, like I said, like if your job applies to your book, then great. But like if the thing that inspired you to write your book is because, you never saw yourself reflected in a book as a child and that really motivated you to write a book that would, reflect like your specific like racial experience or cultural identity or anything like that, your bio is a great place to put that information too. So I think it's always helpful. How do I say this? There are some agents that won't really care, and there are some agents that will be very excited about it. I think like neutral to very excited is the range of expectations that you can have. It doesn't usually hurt to put it in if the agent is just going to be neutral about it anyway, and it might make someone very excited. The only time I would not put it in is if you are querying an agent that you think would not be interested in that, but also I don't think that that person is probably going to be the right agent for you. So generally speaking, I would say like, yeah, you can put it up as early as you can in the book if you think it's like something that makes your book like unique and interesting, which I do, or if you feel more comfortable including it in your bio paragraph, I think that would also be a good place to put it.
Okay, and I'm bumping up this question unfairly. I'm so sorry. We are not technically a democracy, but I know you'll give a really good answer to this. Can you please walk us through commercial, upmarket, and literary?
Oh my gosh, I love this question. So, okay, it's a tricky one, right? Because like I said, you can just call anything fiction. Like that is true, but there are agents that specialize in different writing styles and different tones. And commercial, upmarket, and literary is kind of like the scope of those tones. So, or writing styles, I guess, like craft levels. I don't know what you would call it, but yes, it's tricky. So I always look at it on kind of like a spectrum where commercial is like way at one end and literary is like way at the other end. And when I say like way at the ends, I think of literary as being like a book that like at its most extreme, like you will pick up, you will read the entire book, you will have no idea what happened, and you will be like, that was beautiful. And then on the extreme opposite end, I think of commercial as being a book that is like the total opposite of that. So I pick it up and I have like an absolute romp. And by the end, it feels like my brain has had a fantastic nap. So, like, I put beach reads and things like that on the commercial end, and things like Helen Oyeyemi, who's like one of my favorite authors, but I swear to God, some of her books I have read and I have had to read 3 times before I even know what the plot line is. Like, she's way on the literary end. So, I love both styles of books. It just depends on my mood. And then upmarket is sort of that sweet spot that's like right in the middle. So I tend to think of upmarket as being very comparable to like book club. Um, so, some people honestly like I see a lot of things described as like women's fiction that I would put in that space as well. Um, they tend to be terms that are like a little bit more vague because it's a little bit difficult to pin down what they mean. So in its like simplest terms, I think that like literary tends to be books that people might study, say in like a university class, or that you would see like on the shelves of like an independent bookstore, like a well curated independent bookstore. Commercial are the things that like you're going to grab in an airport bookstore, you're going to see at the grocery store, at Target, like those kinds of places ultimately. And then the stuff that's in the middle are the things that like they give you some food for thought without making it feel like you're working at it. So they have sort of equal blends of entertainment and craft. So that's like this kind of book that I like to read the most. I feel like Where the Crawdads Sing has become like the quintessential example of that, however you feel about that book. But it's one of the ones that like, you could see both being sold like at an airport or also like on an indie bookshelf. Um, and yeah, I think that like there are lots of things that are like somewhere on the spectrum in between those things. So thrillers and things like that, they tend to be romance, they tend to be considered more commercial, they have more accessible writing. Things that are like a little bit more literary tend to be the books that you might have a goal of like getting nominated for an award. So anything you pick up that's like Pulitzer nominated, for example, is probably more in the literary space.
Okay, so I wanted to hop back to a previous question. So, the author would like to know, do agents want to know, the full question was, do agents still want to hear about own voices or disabled writers in the first paragraph? I don't think that would be a barrier. I really hope it's not for this author, but can you give us some hopeful words on that front, Emmy?
Hopeful words, definitely. Unfortunately, like I have found that in publishing, like what is the phrase? Like large ships turn slowly. Is that the like way that people talk about this? It's publishing has definitely taken a turn for the more progressive and more inclusive over the last like 5 to 10 years, and I think we are doing like exceptionally well on some things and better on others. And I feel like disability and chronic illness, at least in my experience as an agent, have been one of the things that we are doing better at. And part of that is that one of the things that's very hard to change in publishing is that like for a long time it was very difficult for disabled and chronically ill people to work in publishing just because of the structure of the industry. And thankfully, that since people have become more aware, there has been more space for accommodation. There have been more like openings where like disability and chronic illness are being considered part of, a diverse workforce, that sort of thing. I think that it's becoming less and less challenging to work in this field as a disabled and chronically ill person. And so I think that, we will over time see a lot more books with good representation of disabled and chronically ill people. And I think that there is a huge audience that is like super hungry for that. That is my like hopefulness. The downside is that like it has been one of the things that I think publishing has been slower to kind of pick up on. And in part, it's just because people who are 100% healthy and have never had, experiences of chronic illness or disability in their life a lot of times associate those kinds of experiences with like deep sadness. And so there's a lot of like grief wrapped up in that for people who are not part of the community. And so those narratives are becoming, I think, much more nuanced in publishing, and there are a lot more people who are more excited to see them, but it has taken some time to get there. So definitely include it. I think that a lot of people are looking for more nuanced representation. I think like we're on the path and we are like moving in the right direction. But if you have found it challenging in the past, like that is not in your mind. It is really tricky. And, people are definitely working
Mm,
hard to make that different too.
my
Well, you're
gosh.
working to make the world better,
Mhm.
Emmy. Thanks for doing
I
this.
try.
Yeah, and here at the Manuscript Academy, we're thrilled for all kinds of stories to come across
100%.
our desk, and it's like our privilege um,
Yeah,
to just be a part of people's stories and people's dreams. Like it's been a really
totally.
just very thankful for this job that we have, and I'm
Yeah.
also I'm a time stickler. I'm really trying to be better at this. Um, so I'm going to say thank you to Emmy. This was amazing. It's just a great reminder. And like wherever you are in this process, it's okay. If you said something out, it's not
Yeah,
perfect. It's okay.
absolutely.
It's
Yeah,
just,
for sure.
this is a learned behavior. It's a learned skill. And it's bloody hard. It's just hard.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And can I just say, like, it's always such a pleasure doing workshops for this community because I do think
Mhm.
that, like, the questions are so good and so smart, and they make me think differently. They make me teach better, and it's really such a pleasure to have a workshop with so many people who are so invested and so passionate about the work that they do. It means the world to me, so I really appreciate that.
Mhm.
And we are so happy that we can give out. Okay, so let's say you've got all of this theory that Emmy has given you, and you would like to try it out in practice. So we are giving out a special prize. If you'd like to try out your query with Emmy as a format of a query consultation, we are drawing 3 of you to win that prize.
We
The
always ask
first,
that you reach out to us and let us know that
yes,
you're the winner of the Emmy
yes,
event because chasing people down gets crazy for us. So
yeah,
please
our
reach
email's
out if
pretty
you
busy.
are a winner at Academy
Yes.
at Manuscript Wishlist.
I want
Okay.
to know if
So
you're a river too, though, just to
A
be clear.
river. Not a night person. We should do all these at 9 a.m. That's your okay.
Okay. So the first winner is Tuesday. Tuesday, send us an email, please.
Tuesday.
Congratulations, Tuesday. The next winner is Linda E. Let's see, Linda. Oh, I'm trying to keep it all anonymous for your privacy, but this last name starts with an EG. I'll say that. Linda with a name starting with EG. You're our second winner. I'm screenshotting that as well. Thanks for your tech patience. And there are a lot of you to scroll through here. Okay, and randomize again. And the last winner is Taylor O. So start with the last name starting with OW. Congratulations, Taylor.
Nice.
So yes, the 3 of you will get a consultation with Emmy. As you probably know, it's member early booking right now for our agent and editor consultations until Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern, but we will make a special link for the 3 winners. And if you'd like to spend more time with Emmy, we get to. I'm so excited. We're having a 3-day workshop at the end of this month. It covers tension, emphasis, and interest, and it covers these in a way that can be applied to your whole work. So it's 3 classes, 3 exercise forums. You don't have to do the homework. No one's going to grade you. A Q&A and a panel, and we will send you some email about that. And our next
Yeah.
prize is we're giving away 3 tickets. It is included with your membership. So if you're a member and you win this workshop ticket drawing, you are free to give the ticket to a friend. Okay, so the first winner is, sorry, my mouse is very bad today. Nola, and the name starts with SO. Congratulations, Nola. The next winner is Cal, and the last name starts with MI. And the last winner is Cindy. And middle name starts with a C, last name starts with a J. Okay, we did it. Emmy, this was so great. Thank you so, so much. I am just so excited that we got to do this. Thank you.
Me too. No, this was super fun for me and also for anyone who's interested in the longer workshop. The principles of this workshop are kind of like the building blocks of the next one. So it'll be a nice like 1-2 punch for people who are interested in both. Yeah, I'm super excited too. This is a really, really fun. It's also my birthday month, so it's a really fun time to
Happy
be doing these
birthday,
workshops.
Emmy.
No, it's been great. So I'm really, really excited to see people later this month too.
All
Awesome.
right. I really hope this means all of you get better request rates. I hope you will tell us how it goes because we love good news. Emmy, you are just a gift. We appreciate you so
Oh
much. Thank
gosh,
you so
thank
much
you
for
so
being
much.
here.
No,
All
this has been
right.
such
Yeah.
a pleasure for me. Thank you.
All right.
Oh,
Go get
thank
it,
you so much.
everybody.
Go get
We
it. All right.
appreciate you.
Good night, everyone.